All right, so picture this. The votes are all counted, the election's over, but there's no victory speech, no clear winner, just a mad scramble. And you know what? This is where the real political game often begins. We're talking about coalition politics, that whole messy, fascinating art of building a government when the voters didn't hand any single party a clear win.
So, what on earth happens in that moment of uncertainty? When an election gives you what's called a hung parliament, how do you actually get from that fractured result to a functioning government? Well, that's the big question we're going to break down right now.
Here's how we're going to do it. First, we'll look at that post-election deadlock. Then we'll dive into the deal-making it takes to actually build a government. After that, we'll check out the rules of the game for governing together, explore the political price parties pay for being in power, and finally, we'll ask, why does any of this really matter? Okay, so the starting point for this whole conversation is that moment of deadlock. The election's done, but the country is kind of left hanging without a clear leader. This is what we call the post-election impasse. And the way you break that impasse is by forming a coalition government. It's basically a formal power-sharing deal. You get two or more parties, often with pretty different ideas, agreeing to cooperate. They join forces so they can command a majority and actually run the country together. At the end of the day, it's all about compromise, not conquest. So how do you actually build this thing? Well, it's not simple, that's for sure. It's a period of really intense, high-stakes negotiation that can be just full of political drama. This is truly the art of the deal. And there's usually a playbook for how it goes down. Once the results are official, the head of state, a president or a monarch, starts consulting with all the party leaders. Based on who seems to have the best shot at forming a stable majority, one leader gets the official task of building a government. And that's when the real horse trading begins, hopefully ending with a formal agreement and a big vote of confidence. Now, you might be wondering how long this takes. And the answer is, it depends. A lot. In Israel, for instance, it's been as quick as 20 days, but it's also been a real slog, taking up to 100 days. And believe it or not, that's nothing. The world record holder is Belgium, which took an incredible 541 days to form a government after its 2010 election. That's a true test of political will right there.
The end result of all this haggling is a super important document, the coalition agreement. And this is not just some handshake deal, okay? It's a detailed roadmap for the government. It spells out the policies they've agreed on, who gets which ministry, the rules of cooperation, the whole shebang. And what's really fascinating is that research shows governments that have these formal written agreements are way more productive and stable.
Okay, so a deal is struck, the government is formed. But, agreeing to govern is one thing. Actually doing it, that's a whole other ballgame. Let's look at the rules of engagement that really shape what a coalition can and can't get done. At the heart of every single coalition, there's this core conflict. It's a constant battle between what the parties promised their voters, what they want to do, and what the structure of the government actually lets them do. These are the institutional constraints. It's really a clash between ambition and cold, hard reality. And this just nails the key takeaway from a ton of research. A really deep study of Austrian coalitions found that the rules of the game, the institutional stuff, are way more powerful in predicting what a government actually does than whether the parties just happen to agree on an issue. In other words, structure pretty much always trumps preference. So what are these powerful rules? Well, research points to three huge ones. First off, if you get your promise into that written coalition agreement, you literally double its chances of becoming law. Second, if your party controls the ministry in charge of that policy area, your odds of getting it done jump by over 60%. And finally, get this, it's way easier to stop something than to start something. Pledges to just keep things the same are almost 50% more likely to succeed. Let's be honest, governing is tough. And making all those compromises that a coalition demands, well, that comes with consequences. Sooner or later, every party has to go back and face the voters. And there's almost always a price to be paid for power. Academics call this the cost of ruling. Basically, voters have a habit of punishing the parties in government. But here's the kicker. That punishment is rarely spread out evenly. It's the smaller, junior partners in a coalition that often get hit the hardest. They're forced to compromise on their core beliefs, but they still get blamed for the government's overall record, and that really blurs what they stand for in the eyes of voters. Yeah, just look at how this plays out. In political systems where the legislature has kind of weak committees and not much oversight power, what happens? The prime minister's party takes a little hit at the next election, sure, but the junior partner, they can suffer a massive loss of votes. They just don't have a platform to show they're different, so they end up taking most of the blame. But, and this is a fascinating twist,
In systems with strong parliamentary committees, the whole story changes. These committees give the smaller parties a powerful stage. They can question ministers, influence laws, and publicly fight for what their party believes in. And as a result, their election losses are much smaller, and more of that voter anger shifts to the prime minister's party, which is arguably where it belongs. The very structure of the parliament can act like a shield.
So let's pull back and look at the big picture here. We've seen how they're formed, we've seen how they work, but are coalition governments actually a good thing for democracy? Why does any of this really matter? Well, there are strong arguments on both sides. On one hand, people who support them say coalitions lead to consensus, they better reflect what all the voters want, and they tone down extreme positions. But the critics, they'll tell you coalitions can be unstable, they give tiny kingmaker parties way too much power, and they can kill real debate by forcing everyone into a manufactured consensus. But here's the thing, whether you love them or hate them, coalitions aren't some weird exception to the rule. They are a global norm. From Germany and Spain to India and New Zealand, many of the world's most stable democracies are governed this way. It's just a standard feature of modern politics. That being said, the drive to build these big, stable coalitions can have some pretty weird side effects. To keep all the partners happy, governments can become, well, bloated. There was a point in Israel where the cabinet had gotten so huge that nearly 1/3 of all members of parliament were serving as either a minister or a deputy minister. And that drastically weakens the legislator's ability to keep an eye on the very government it created. Which brings us to our final question, the one at the heart of it all. Are these complex, power-sharing deals a sign of a mature, healthy democracy that values compromise? Or are they just a recipe for backroom deals, instability, and political gridlock? The answer, much like coalition politics itself, is rarely ever simple.